You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that is honest, reveals the facts, truth, and statistics, and does not mess around. Follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter at DT2Phillips. Email me at TaylorGatorPhillips14@yahoo.com. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter at EdSmith313, and go to our website at MichiganSportsTruth.com. Also like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join our Facebook group with the same name. The Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker is also available on iHeartRadio and SoundCloud. Also a subsidiary of Sports Radio Detroit, thus available on iTunes and Podbean. This podcast is particularly not for entertainment purposes, and the views expressed by the host of this podcast are opinion-based. However, they do not come without facts, research, statistics, and truth, whether other people like it or not, and no matter how harsh or complicated it may be. This is the Michigan Sports Truth, and nothing can ever stop it from being correct.
And this is episode 272 of the Week in Review of the Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker. Taylor Phillips along with Buck Geno III, filling in for Ed Smith due to private personal reasons. Buck Geno can be followed on Twitter at Buck Geno III, triple I in Roman numerals, Buck Geno III. Buck, how are you doing this week?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good. So we have Tigers, Red Wings, Pistons, and even a little bit of Spartan football to cover. So let's get to it. Tigers first. It's summertime.
That one is long gone.
Boy, it feels like it. We kind of wish it wasn't with the way the Tigers are playing now, but we're at the All-Star break, and the Tigers, where they're at now, clearly going to be stellars in the trade deadline coming up here on July 31st. So the questions now become, here in the next 21 days, who goes and what are the prices that they're going to get for the trade pieces that they do have? Because even though the Tigers themselves are not playing good baseball, individually they have a lot of good trade pieces. And we've talked about it on this podcast. We've talked it on the MST Daily podcast, post games. It's at this point now, the Tigers, they're not going to get any better. I mean, Miguel Cabrera is aging, Justin Verlander is aging, right, and the core of this team simply is not ready to launch itself into another championship run. And when you see that on the radar, and they did as well as they could for as long as they could, but when you see that time come, it's time to really kind of reload, regroup, and see what you can do. I mean, they have a nice nucleus of younger players that they can already get started with. The Michael Fulmers. I'm not ready to give up on Daniel Norris quite yet. Nick Castellanos, for all his struggles, is probably going to be here for a while. And they have Justin Upton under pretty much team control. It is his option at the end of this year, but based on his stats, I don't think he's going to get any more money going on the free agent market as he's coming into his prime years as an outfielder. So, I mean, they have a decent nucleus. They have a decent farm system as far as prospects. They have 3 of the top 100 prospects now with signing of Alex Faedo. So, at this point for the Tigers, it really has to become about how much can they get in return for the pieces that they have. And you look at the bullpen, Justin Wilson will be a valuable piece for a team looking to add that 8th inning or 9th inning guy. You look at Shane Green, who has really, over the balance of the season, had some rough patches, but really hasn't done too bad of a job. He also could be a valuable trade chip, because if there's one thing that teams like to do at the trade deadline, it's find bullpen help. And Shane Green and Justin Wilson fit the bill quite nicely there. And on the offensive side, they have pending free agent J.D. Martinez. And on the starting pitching side, they have Justin Verlander. So they've got 4, I would consider, really nice trade pieces. They have other ones as well. Alex Avila, James McCann, probably 2 of the lesser heralded trade chips, but they have those as well. And you have to really look at, when you're at this point of the season and where they're at in the standings, look at moving as much as you can and getting as much as you can back in return. And the thing to think about for previous years, I saw this tweeted earlier, Joakim Soria got the number 13 prospect, who ended up being Jacoby Jones, for shortstop and outfield. That was Jacoby Jones. He was a 13th prospect. And other trades they have made, they've gotten anywhere between number 20 and number 30 in the top 100 prospects range. So if you're looking to move quickly on some younger talent and get back to competitive baseball sooner rather than later, I feel like they would have to sell and sell hard. And I know there's a lot of fans that probably don't get that, and it's understandable why they might not get it. But at the same time, I mean, you have to let go. Justin Verlander's had a nice career in Detroit, but he's not going to win a championship here, at least not in their current state. And for him to get moved and really go to a contender, the Cubs or the Dodgers or some other organization that has a deep farm system that is ready to take on another starting pitcher, I think that he would be a good addition. And at this point for the Tigers, it's not going to get any better. And to get better, sometimes you have to get worse. And I think that's really where they're at. It's pretty cut and dry with the way they played, especially in that weekend series against Cleveland. Just very listless. It was not a good effort by them. And coming up into the All-Star break, it just was not a very good effort by the Tigers. They lost the series to the San Francisco Giants, who are not a good baseball club, at home. And they only get one against Cleveland in that series as well. So they're taking way too many steps backward. And I think at this time, we've been saying it for a while now, but like I said, 3 weeks until the trade deadline, 3 weeks from today, actually,
they got to sell.
That'll be coming. And, it'll have to be a seller's market for the Tigers, because obviously just don't have the gas in the tank to make any sort of run this year. And if they don't sell, they're really doing the fans a disservice, because all you're doing is prolonging the inevitable.
Yeah, that's right, because Tigers are under 500, of course. They're like 9 or 8 games below 500. It's already
not only are they under,
July
not only are they under 500, Taylor, they're playing poor baseball. I mean, it'd be one thing if they're losing every game by 1 run, but they're just not playing good baseball. And we can talk about why they're not doing that, but it's just the writing's on the wall. I mean, you've got a manager that is going to be up at the end of this year with his contract. You've got a lot of guys who are getting older. And, I mean, the best you can hope for is just getting as much as you can out of that team and doing a mini fire sale. Not a complete one, because they're not looking to move guys like Michael Fulmer, Matt Boyd, Daniel Norris, and guys of that ilk. But they are looking to move some of their established players and get something in return for them.
So, here are those trade rumor updates. The Tigers want a huge return for Justin Verlander. They won't retain their salary. The Cubs were interested in him, the Chicago Cubs, but now they want Fulmer and Norris instead. They're out of the trade market talks with Justin Verlander. And I was hearing that on the Valeni show on 97 Won the Ticket. Valeni was reading that off of Peter Gammons. And if you trade Michael Fulmer, you get a huge return of top MLB-ready prospects. That's what Mike Valeni pointed out on 97 Won the Ticket on his show. Daniel Norris, you get a short return. Justin Verlander says worth $70 million. That's way too much for the Cubs to pay in an entire contract. I mean, the Cubs are looking to buy, and the Tigers are looking to sell.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Cubs are in a championship window, having coming off their World Series last year. I find it hard to believe that the Tigers don't want to retain salary. Well, I shouldn't say I find it hard to believe. I find it hard to fathom that they wouldn't have to retain any salary in a deal with with Justin Verlander simply because of the amount of money that he is due over the next 4 years. You're going to have to do it. I mean, if you want him to be traded and you want to get something decent in return, the Cubs are saying, hey, if you're not going to retain any salary, we got to get something for that. Because it's really going to hamstring their efforts to sign other players for positions they might need down the road. So I understand where the Cubs are coming from. Maybe the price is a little high in Michael Fulmer, but I understand where they're coming from. And I think that they'll probably come to some agreement. But going back to other things that we've talked about, Chris Ilitch doesn't want to spend money on a guy that's not going to play for him. And I think that's where the root of this is coming from, is that Chris Ilitch, the owner of the Tigers, part of the ownership group of the Ilitch family, but he does not want to pay Justin Verlander to pitch for the Chicago Cubs. And I think he's going to have to come off that stance if he wants to be able to improve the team.
Right. And speaking of Daniel Norris was placed on the 10-day disabled list with a groin pull. Thus, Blaine Hardy was called up from the AAA Toledo Mudhens. Daniel Norris either might have to wait until he's back from the 10-day disabled list, or he can be traded while on the 10-day disabled list. And the Cubs will have to wait for him if they get him.
Well, Daniel Norris has been beset by injuries pretty much his entire career, and it's really a shame because I think he's got a lot of potential. But the other thing you have to think about is if he's not going to stay healthy, then at some point you're going to have to look at trying to move him or do something else. I can see down the road with the starting pitchers they have coming up through the system. I think that Danny Norris, with his arsenal that he has, I think that he probably would be able to be converted into some sort of middle reliever, kind of like a Shane Green. And Shane Green was a starter when he got into this league. Wasn't very good at it. So they converted him to a setup guy or a middle inning guy, and he's actually been quite effective in that role. And I could see if everybody develops the way they're supposed to be, then I could see Daniel Norris making that move and being quite effective.
Definitely. So, now to Fulmer. Fulmer will not play in the All-Star game because he started Sunday, got the win against the Indians, of course. This is kind of a confusing thing, to say the least. Michael Fulmer, you have a sub 500 record and you're playing poorly, like you pointed out, and you're keeping Michael Fulmer in his routine spot of the rotation, and when it's his turn, and you're the manager, Brad Ausmus, you let him pitch. Thus, you are not letting Michael Fulmer pitch in the All-Star game. And if you're doing that instead, you're just wasting his energy and wasting your team's energy, and just trying to get a meaningless win just to put a little extra meaningless payroll piggy bank in the Ilitch family's payroll piggy bank. And that meaningless wins like that just kind of keep the Ilitch family from trying to sell the Tigers, because rumor is this is the plan. The Tigers have to lose more games and tank in order to have Chris Ilitch really be forced to sell the Tigers, at least. And speaking of which, Spiro Avenue And Justin Spiro published an article, "For Sale Soon," headline, "Chris Ilitch looks to a future without the Tigers." And Buck, I'm pretty sure you read that one like I did.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's going to be the more lucrative opportunity for him to sell. He wants to really keep the Red Wings just because they have a new building and they've got a lot of capital sunk into that. And if you're looking to make some money back, you're obviously going to look for the most return you can get. And if you're going to sell a team, it's probably going to be the Tigers. So that said, like we've mentioned before, the more games they lose, the less butts get put in the seats, the harder it is for him to keep running that team in the black. And in fact, they're not even in the black. They've been losing money.
Yeah.
But, I mean...
Same goes for the Red Wings. What if the Red Wings keep tanking all the way to the bottom?
With the new arena, I mean, that's just a revenue stream that they're going to have the luxury of, the novelty of a new arena to keep people coming in for at least the first year or so. But the Tigers, I mean, they are what they are, and nobody's going to go watch a losing baseball team. I mean, that's just how it is. And I think that for them to really move forward in that process, part of that process would be to get rid of some of the names that people will still pay to see, like a Justin Verlander and other pieces like that. And that would be part of that plan. So if they do move Verlander, the reason he doesn't want to retain any salary is because he's trying to get maximum return on his sale. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But, I think that it makes a whole lot of sense. If the plan is to sell the Tigers, that you'd have to remove some of those pieces and some of the motivation for people to come to the ballpark in order to really make it, for Chris Ilitch, a maximum return.
Yeah, including a much better farm system, or at least a few better MLB-ready prospects and minor league players, for example. That's what you want.
Right, because if you're looking to buy, I mean, nobody that has a winning club they're probably not going to sell. So if you have a losing club, if you're looking to sell, if I'm looking to buy a team, you're looking at a team that you can point to the future and say, hey, we've got a good group of players coming up. And if you can get a return on investment on some of your trades and stock up that farm system, it makes it more palatable to the buyer.
Definitely. Now, the other part we want to talk about in terms of this article that Spiro published in terms of Chris Ilitch most likely selling the Tigers. Now, I mean, the source says Chris wants to sell the Tigers. And it also said, quote, "If Chris Ilitch had his way, Tom Gores would make a fair offer for the Tigers. It's a natural fit." And the question is, a couple paragraphs later, does Gores have any interest in buying the Tigers? Another source connected with Chris Ilitch said, quote, "Gores is a self-made billionaire who knows better than to show his cards, but there are signs of interest," unquote. Gores has made multiple references to the Tigers being a treasured asset in his discussions with Ilitch. Gores has also expressed to Ilitch his commitment to continued expansion of his interests in the city of Detroit. The desire is said to extend beyond the soccer franchises Gores is attempting to launch in a partnership with yet another billionaire, Michigan local Dan Gilbert of Quicken Loans, also the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Tom Gores is trying to launch the Detroit soccer team and buy the Tigers from Chris Ilitch, or at least showing interest.
Yeah, and Tom Gores has made his money by buying distressed assets and turning a profit with them. I mean, look at what he did with the Pistons. Got them for really was considered a bargain basement price in the world of professional sports, buying them from the Davidson family. And now, if you were able to turn around and sell them, which he's not looking to do right now, he would make considerably more than what he bought them for, excuse me. So, when we're talking about that, it really is a natural fit, because if you're looking at this team, they're on the decline. They still have a pretty high payroll, which might be a little bit of an issue.
$200 million.
Right, but the same thing still applies, that it's going to be a distressed asset, and what you can do to make that more attractive to him is getting rid of some of that high salary and shutting it to other teams, and making sure that when you do sell it, you're selling it at a fair price, but you're giving Gores the opportunity to really come up and make some money off of the deal by having it grow in value. So that's going to be the key here. I mean, you don't want to outright just sell it to them for as low as you can go. But if you're looking at the Tigers' long-term outlook, nobody would buy them in their current state, because they would have to do all the work. So if Chris Ilitch and Al Avila can make this a more palatable sale by trading some of those bigger names, not having to replace them with high salary players, then Tom Gores might be more amenable to buying them, because he knows that he can make a profit with them in the later years.
Those are good points. Just have to see what happens. Right now, the Tigers are in a tight situation. That last sentence, they are in limbo financially. And might take another year or two before the sale actually completes. But back to the Red Wings here. I think everybody in the Detroit area, including the city of Detroit, will be really drawn to the new Little Caesars Arena, despite how bad the Red Wings team has become the last 2 or 3 years, 3 to 4 years actually, which actually loses the Ilitch family even more money in their payroll piggy bank, if you know what I mean. It just the drawing of even more and more people to Red Wings games at the new Little Caesars Arena still makes more money. That saves the Ilitch family in keeping the Red Wings franchise. That's too much for the Ilitches to even have no choice but to sell that franchise. They might as well have to keep it, at least for now, for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have one team, and we'll get to talking about the Red Wings here in just a second, but
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense for them to obviously look at selling the Red Wings simply because they have a built-in revenue stream with that new arena. They have some time to make that team better if they possibly can. But with the lure of a new arena, you're going to have that revenue stream pretty much built in, regardless of how bad that team is. You're going to have them, I don't want to say guaranteed, but it's a much stronger bet that they'll have a better chance of making money with that team than they do with the Tigers. And so it's going to be interesting to see how it all falls into place, but I cannot believe that Chris Ilitch would continue to stand to lose money on the Tigers, even if he was to reduce payroll, because if you're reducing payroll, you're probably not getting that much better. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and hopefully the Tigers, if they are sold, take a short-term comeback rather than what we saw in the early 2000s and late 90s, which was just a morass of bad baseball, bad contracts, bad players, just you don't want to get to that point because it really drives home the point for the fans to not attend those games, and it becomes harder for a new owner to draw teams in when you're really rebuilding the last roster from square one. So I think if Chris Ilitch is interested in selling the Tigers, then these next couple months will be pretty key. And I don't want to say showing his hand, but if he is interested in selling them, then trying to get them into a position that it's more advantageous for the buyer, whoever that might be, to be able to turn that franchise around rather than leaving it with nothing and little to no hope of getting any of that equity back in the short term.
Yep. That would make us Red Wing fans stuck with Chris Ilitch, keeping the Red Wings for maybe like another 7 to 10 years, I would say. Maybe even longer than that. But speaking of the Red Wings, a little bit of a roster move here. Red Wings right winger Tomas Tatar has filed for arbitration. He was asking for $6 million annually, not $5 million, $6 million. And Ken Holland felt like he could not afford to pay Tomas Tatar that much money per year. So that makes Tomas Tatar an arbitration contract year player, meaning he will likely be an unrestricted free agent. He will be an unrestricted free agent next summer and likely to depart from the Motor City. And the Red Wings will have to miss him from there. And Tomas Tatar's a scoring threat too.
Well, looking at all the numbers and putting it all together, Tomas Tatar has, I believe I saw it with Press on Fire from The Athletic, the third best scoring forward on a non-entry level contract. That's a long way of saying he's a valuable asset. And with all the other terrible contracts that Ken Holland has signed, for him to say that he can't afford Tomas Tatar, who is your team's leading scorer over the last 3 years in goals, really speaks to the mismanagement of this franchise and their roster. Because you have guys like Danny DeKeyser, Justin Advocator, and Darren Helm, and to some extent Gustav Nyquist, soaking up comparable salaries or higher and getting far less production than Tomas Tatar is able to provide. And it's just a shame that he's trying to lowball a guy that is really the linchpin for scoring for that team. Now, granted, they're not a great team, but you're not going to get any better if you're losing 30 goals because that's not going to be something that you can just go out and replace. And Ken Holland, his management style has been widely panned by us and many other sources in the Detroit sports media, not the beat writers, of course, because they're already bought and paid for. But you look at that roster, and you're trying to tell me that Tomas Tatar isn't worth $6 million a year, but Justin Advocator is worth what he's getting, that Danny DeKeyser is worth what he's getting. I mean, those are the kind of things that just frustrate a fan base simply because it's pretty plain to see what the contributions are from all of those players. And to tell Tomas Tatar, yeah, we can't afford to pay what you probably deserve because we have other guys on this team that we've already committed money to that aren't doing a hell of a lot. And for Ken Holland to come across and really drive him to arbitration simply because of all the other bad contracts that are on his team, it just goes to show that at this point, it's really time for him to go. You cannot tell me that Tomas Tatar is worth less than those players that are already on the roster.
He's not.
He's your leading scorer. Mm-hmm. You pay your leading scorer what he deserves. And he can't, because he's already committed money to other assets that are giving him far less bang for his buck. But he continues to play the line that they do all these other things. I don't know what games he's watching. But for you to tell me that Tomas Tatar isn't worth what he's getting and the production he's had on a really subpar team, it boggles the mind. And it makes no sense. And then in unrestricted free agency, they signed Trevor Daley to a 3-year contract, which they already have a full roster of defensemen. Why did you need to go out and spend that money? That money could have gone to Tomas Tatar. They can afford $6 million a year if they don't sign Trevor Daley. They can afford $6 million a year if you're not giving contracts out like candy. But they can't do that because all of that money's already gone. And
wasted.
There's nobody's going to take those off their hands because they're terrible contracts. And it just goes to show that Ken Holland has completely mismanaged this roster, and this is another nail in the coffin for him that says, to me, that he has really just lost his way in all facets of roster and player management. And for him to play hardball with a player that is giving him the most return on his investment per dollar is just mind-boggling to me. And I just don't see how they come out of this with any sort of victory. Because Tomas Tatar, if he goes to arbitration, will get a 1-year bridge deal. And he'll go to unrestricted free agency. He'll remember how he was treated. He's not going to want to stay here. He's going to want to go to some team that provides him a competitive salary and appreciates what he brings to the table. And I think it's just a shame that they've got somebody that they brought up through the system, groomed and gotten ready, and really turned into a very good NHL player, and they're not going to be able to keep him because they have to have guys like Justin Abdelkader making the money he does, and they have guys like Danny DeKeyser making the money he does and getting far less production. It's terrible. It makes no sense, and yet it's going to happen. And for Ken Holland to spin it any other way than I signed all these bad contracts and now I can't give you any money is just an outright lie. There's no way that you can go to the arbitration table and say, yeah, he's not worth as much as what he says he's supposed to get, because anybody that has any sort of grasp of the numbers is going to bring that to the attention of the arbitrator and say, look at what these guys are making. This is the production level he's at. Why is he not making that much money? So I think that this is going to be a lose-lose for the Red Wings regardless. And even if he were to get awarded a 1-year deal in arbitration, it probably will be for a pretty healthy chunk of change. And that's going to force Ken Holland to either A, trade him to a team that would be able to take his salary on, or B, pay him, make some roster moves to make the cap work, and then next year after he turns into an unrestricted free agent, compete with all the other clubs in the league for his services. And it's just probably going to end up in Tomas Tatar going somewhere else and getting paid his fair salary because Ken Holland feels that he needs to sign all these other contracts and give all these other guys this money for doing nothing. Well, I shouldn't say nothing, but far less than what comparable salaries the NHL are producing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just typical Ken Holland here. I'm really kind of numb to it. Ken Holland will just never change. He's in the final year of his contract, and man, for Ilitch to never fire Holland or anybody else, you have to hope something turns up with the Ilitch family, and that's what I pointed out before. Red Wing fans have to hope that there's a like a new sports owner that means a lot more business with the Red Wings. And that's all there is to it.
It's just really, at this point, just a very dire situation. And there's really only one person to blame. And when you look at it through the lens of a fan, there's no other way around it than it's a mismanagement of not only assets, but also of, I don't want to say public relations, but more of just how you're viewed by other teams in that league. And right now, Detroit is not viewed as a destination for free agents to go to that are looking to compete for a championship. And for years, they were. If you wanted to win, you were signing with the Red Wings. And that was just how it went. And now, I mean, Trevor Daley has won 2 cups in a row, and they're trying to sell us on this notion that he came to the Red Wings because he likes their chances. That's a bald-faced lie. He just came from a team that won 2 straight, and he was a contributor on those teams. And now him coming to the Red Wings at an inflated salary and trying to give us the sell job of he thinks they can do something special or he thinks he can help them get back to where they were, that's a load of malarkey. He came because he got the term and the money that he was seeking and really was able to take advantage of somebody that is in a desperate situation, looking to make a move, and he got his money. I don't begrudge Trevor Daley. I mean, of course you want to make as much money as possible. I mean, if somebody hands you a check for double your salary, you're probably going to go to that place. I mean, that goes for anybody, not just a professional sports player. That goes for anybody in the workplace. And it's just amazing to me how all of these fallacies are being portrayed, that he's going to come to the Red Wings because he thinks they have a good chance of making the playoffs and doing something. I mean, it's quite obvious. Trevor Daley's not going to put them in the playoffs. He might help them win a game or two, but it's not going to be something that he's going to bring them from 76 points to 100. He's obviously not that type of player. And now you're going to pay the price of losing your most productive forward because you had to have a guy that is going to make you a little bit better in the short term. So again, the long-term vision for Ken Howell is virtually nil, and he's just making bad move after bad move. You know, it's like a kid that gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar and then keeps trying to make excuse after excuse, just keeps digging that hole. And that's what Ken Howell is doing. He just keeps digging that hole, making it worse, throwing money around because he's trying to make it work so he can get back to the playoffs and somehow validate what he's been doing over the course of the last 3 or 4 seasons. And it just is going to end in disaster because there's not going to be any way that they're going to replace Tomas Tatar's production. They're not going to have guys magically that were scoring 5 or 6 goals a year go up to 30. It just doesn't happen. And for them to try to portray it in any other way is just really kind of an insult to the fans that pay attention to what's going on, not only at this team, but in the league.
But in the sports business, right? Buck, I lost you. But yeah, Ken Holland.
I'm still here.
Yep.
Are you out of your mind?
Yep. All right. Yep. Yeah, that's all there is to it. Ken Holland, the worst GM in hockey, and maybe in all of sports as well. Those are the examples that explain it right there. He just keeps on spending money and spending money. That's worthless.
Well, not only that, but if he was committed to a long-term solution, and we've talked about this as well, your younger players that you draft and bring up through the system, what kind of message does that send to them as well? Because it tells me, if I'm a player coming up through the ranks, hey, if I get really good, and this guy is cutting the checks, he's probably going to try to take money out of my pocket because he's trying to plug holes everywhere else. He basically digs one hole to fill another. And he's always said, he's always said, I'm not going to do that. Well, that's what you're doing. By not paying Tomas Tatar a fair salary for what he is able to do on the ice, you're just going to dig another hole to fill another one. And that's what the Trevor Daley signing was. He's trying to fill a hole. And he's going to do so, but he's going to create a bigger one because he's not going to be able to afford to pay Tomas Tatar for a long-term contract. And it doesn't make sense. If you're trying to tell people, hey, we're trying to win every year, well, if you were trying to win every year, then you wouldn't be signing guys to ridiculous contracts that nobody else in the league was offering. You know, we'll take Darren Helm's contract, for example. They outbid themselves. The Rangers did make a contract offer to Darren Helm. It sure as hell wasn't for $3.85 million a year. And they're bidding against themselves. And when you're doing that, you're fighting a losing battle because all you're doing is restricting your ability to make other deals down the road. And again, you have to dig other holes to fill ones that you've already made.
Yeah, and not only does the Trevor Daley signing take away another spot from the younger guys, it takes too much cap space away from Tomas Tatar, who's really asking for more money from Ken Holland, and Ken Holland somehow doesn't have enough for Tomas Tatar to give. And it's just a total disaster. Just total disaster after total disaster. It just keeps happening every freaking year.
You know, as a general manager, you're going to make a bad signing here and there. It's just the nature of the business. You're going to at some point have dead money on your roster,
especially if
because somebody doesn't perform. Well, right. I mean, but even successful teams, I mean, you know, you're not going to be able to avoid some guys underperforming on their contract. That's just the nature of the business. But you continue to do it, and you stubbornly move forward with those types of deals because you think one of those is going to eventually pan out. I mean, you know, I kind of compare it to the guy that sits at the blackjack table all day and gambles away his life savings because he thinks the next hand's the winner. That's what Ken Holland is doing right now. He just keeps pumping money into contracts that don't have any realistic possibility of panning out how he feels that they need to in order for that to be considered a success.
There you go. So, that's Red Wings talk. That's all the information that we have to give you in terms of the Red Wings. And now we talk about some Pistons here. A lot of Pistons news here.
Left sideline, 3, and he answers.
The Pistons have traded small forward Marcus Morris to the Boston Celtics for shooting guard Avery Bradley, thus leaving case shooting guard Kentavious Caldwell-Pope no room or not enough room whatsoever. They renounced him by signing him to a qualifying offer, making him an unrestricted free agent next summer, which means he's likely gone after this upcoming 2017-2018 NBA regular season. And Bleacher Report's possible destinations for him are the Atlanta Hawks, Brooklyn Nets, Chicago Bulls, LA Lakers, Orlando Magic, Philadelphia 76ers, and the Utah Jazz. And I posted that on the Michigan Sports Truth Facebook page and its Facebook group. And I mean, I guess it's a fair trade, if not good, for Avery Bradley if you're trading Marcus Morris away. But except Marcus Morris just hadn't been too good offensively for the Pistons. Avery Bradley, Pistons get another good 3-point shooter and a good defender in Avery Bradley. And for KCP, his possible destinations on Bleacher Report. Have you had time to read the payrolls yet for each team?
I have not, but going back to your point on KCP, Tom Gores has adamantly defended his stance on they are not going to go over the salary tax or the luxury tax, threshold, and so they're at that cutoff, and I think it's a deserved limit because if you're not going to make the playoffs, you don't need to be paying a luxury tax. And when they signed Eric Moreland to a long-term deal, then that didn't leave any room for them to be able to fit KCP under that team-defined cap or the NBA-defined cap with that luxury tax threshold. And now with the roster that they have, with Langston Galloway and now Avery Bradley, renouncing KCP's rights is the only thing that they had the choice to do. And we've talked about it coming up throughout the season. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, for all his effort and all his potential, I just don't think he's a max player. He's a max player maybe on the Pistons, but for other teams, I mean, the interest was pretty lukewarm. I mean, there wasn't a lot of people just looking to add him at the price that he was projected to draw. And it's unfortunate, but I think that they did themselves a favor by picking up a guy like Galloway and making a trade for Avery Bradley, because now they've got that spot covered. They've got that two-guard covered, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is going to have to apply his services elsewhere. And I think it became a matter for the Pistons of, are we going to pay a guy who has had really limited time in the NBA, and for all the potential that he might bring, again, we talk about that dead money. Do you really want to hand out that contract to a guy where if he goes south, your team is pretty much hamstrung by that salary, and making it harder to get other free agents to come to Detroit and build a winning team? So Stan Van Gundy, as the team president, and we've seen this with other franchises, when he was with the Orlando Magic, that's what he built his teams on, outside shooting and defense. And Avery Bradley and Langston Galloway fit that bill to a T. And so, for all the talent that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has, I feel like the Pistons have filled that spot more than adequately, and it allows them the flexibility to basically lose KCP for nothing. And I think that it goes back to, like I said before, there wasn't a lot of interest for KCP. The trade market was pretty low during this last NBA season, and teams weren't looking to add somebody that they might have to pay a pretty good chunk of money to, that for a relatively unproven, or at least a consistent player, because Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is not that old. You're kind of loath to hand him a max contract, or at least close to a max contract, when if that deal goes south, or if he goes south, then that deal really is an albatross on your salary cap. So I don't like that they lose him for nothing, and they don't get anything in return. But they've made some corresponding moves that I feel are more than adequate to cover up for that loss. And that's kind of the difference when you look at a team like the Pistons versus a team like the Red Wings, losing Tomas Tatar for the Red Wings, they don't have another guy that they can get that will do what he does. Speaking of Tomas Tatar, they don't have the availability to do that. Whereas the Pistons were proactive, were able to sign a couple of players, acquire a couple of players that were going to fill the void that KCP was going to leave if they weren't able to re-sign him. So, talk about, you can criticize the losing of KCP for nothing, but at least they were proactive and filled them with capable players and really kind of got out unscathed roster-wise as far as their core for the team that they're going to put on the floor in the next season. So the Pistons is kind of a make or break year for Stan Van Gundy. I think that last year was obviously a failure. They made the playoffs the year before, got dusted by the Cavaliers, and then kind of fell off the wagon coming down the stretch last year in playoff contention. And Stan Van Gundy had to make a move. He needs to get back into the Eastern playoff picture where if you're talking about getting into the playoff picture in the East, it's not that hard. And for teams that are at the top, the Bostons and the Clevelands of the world, you're probably not going to compete with them. But if you can sneak into the playoffs and maybe get stealed around or at least perform well, that's progress. I'm not expecting them to compete for a title anytime soon. But in the East, it's very wide open when you're talking about those bottom 6 spots. So I think the Pistons have done well in at least assuring themselves a chance at returning to the playoffs by making the moves that they have.
Yeah, it's kind of like this. They're kind of the same situation, except Tomas Tatar's arbitration year, KCP's qualifying offer year. They're kind of the same. The Pistons not only
very similar.
Not only did they lose Marcus Morris and KCP, they also lost Aron Baynes, who signed a 1-year, $4.3 million deal with the Celtics. Considering, like you pointed out off the air, Kelly Olynyk to the Miami Heat, Aron Baynes is going to see more playing time. So that makes 3. So that leaves the Pistons with 2 centers, Andre Drummond and Boban Marjanovic. And we're going to get to Andre Drummond next, but best of luck to Aron Baynes. Left the Pistons option year for $6.5 million. Choose to get paid for $4.3 million for just 1 year, which is $2.2 million less. But hey, I think regardless, the Pistons are better off without Aron Baynes, period.
Well, he takes the pay cut and a real shot at the title. I mean, the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers, obviously the class of the Eastern Conference, with Washington and Toronto close behind as far as the 3 and 4 teams in that conference. But like I said, the bottom 6 in the Eastern Conference, you could throw them all into a hat and pick them out, and they'd probably be pretty even, regardless of how that played out. So if you're the Pistons, making the moves that they did probably gives them a better shot to get in there. And then for Aron Baynes, yeah, he takes a pay cut, but he's going to probably get some pretty good playing time on a team that is still a very competent and very good chance, has a very good chance of at least, if not making the Eastern Conference Finals, making the NBA Finals. And the Pistons right now just don't. So I think for Aron Baynes, the pay cut is going to be offset by the fact that he's going to be playing for a team that is going to be playing well into the postseason. And the Pistons now are free to use Boban Marjanovic in that rotation and really see what kind of return on investment they're going to get for the deal they signed him to last year, which was the same money, the signed Langston Galloway for, which is 3 years at $21 million. So $7 million apiece.
That's exactly true. And speaking of Andre Drummond and Boban Marjanovic, I ran into an article from Bleacher Report, an article published by Shameek Mohile of 16 Wins a Ring, headlining how Andre Drummond can improve offensively to become an elite center. You just go like 8 paragraphs down. The league has headed in a different direction. The league once predicated on big man dominance in the post, and defensively through rim protection has emphasized the ability to stretch the floor. Big men such as DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, Brook Lopez, and even Marc Gasol have expanded their range to accommodate this rapid change in league mentality. However, it's safe to say that Andre Drummond will never be able to step out to mid-range, never mind three-point range. So how can a player who plays a dying style of basketball on a fringe playoff team become one of the league's best centers? The answer is very simple. Reduce the amount of time that Andre Drummond touches the ball. This is very accurate and very analytic. Andre Drummond is best when he's touching the ball for less than 2 seconds. He averages 60.2% from the field compared to 39.7% when he holds the ball for longer than 2 seconds. Reducing the amount of time that Drummond has the ball in his hands will also improve the overall pace of the team, where the Pistons rank 24th in the league, and also reduce that possibility that Drummond gets fouled. Drummond's free throw woes are no surprise to any team in the league, which is why he shot at 129 more free throws than the next most Piston, Tobias Harris. Drummond shoots an abysmal 38% from the line, as we know, I may add, and has a ceiling of 0.77 points per possession, assuming he goes to the line for 2 shots each time. By reducing the trips to the line, there are less chances for Drummond to have an opportunity to showcase his ineptitude at the charity stripe. Reading the touch time also implies that the reliance on post-ups are drastically reduced from Andre Drummond's repertoire. Post-ups are one of Andre Drummond's least efficient play types, where he shoots 41.9% and ranks in the 19th percentile. Andre Drummond averages 0.73 points per possession on post-ups. This means he scores more points per possession shooting free throws than post-ups. That's reprehensible. So, man, Drummond's post-up statistics are worse than his free throw percentages. Just barely, but seriously. I mean, come on.
It's pretty awful, considering how inept he is at the free throw line. And, going back to roster construction for Stan Van Gundy, when he had his most effective roster, when he was with the Orlando Magic, it was pretty much 4 Bombers and Dwight Howard. And Dwight Howard is very similar to Andre Drummond in the fact that he's not a great free throw shooter. And if you limit the time with his hands on the ball, he ends up becoming more effective simply because he's not going to the free throw line as much, and it increases his chances of getting points during that possession. And I think that for the Pistons, the key is going to be this year, really make Andre Drummond, he's not going to be a focal point of the offense at any point, but really just kind of use him as a conduit to the other team, or for his teammates to get open looks, because we know he's not a good post-up player. We know he's a terrible free throw shooter. And so really where he can make his mark is getting rebounds or having the ball come through the post and back out, and minimizing his time with the ball will also give the other shooters on that team a better chance of creating shots. And with the percentages that they're shooting, I mean, you look at Avery Bradley and Langston Galloway, both competent long-distance shooters. If you can get them scoring open up some opportunities for Drummond to get easy baskets down low because they're not going to be able to sag in the middle and foul him when he gets the ball. So, I see very stunning parallels between this team that Dave Mignotti is trying to construct and his best teams when he had the Orlando Magic. You're not looking for Dwight Howard or Andre Drummond, if we're talking about the Pistons. You're not looking for your center to get the ball and have it just never come back out of the lane. You use him as a conduit, and then when the defense is extended and he can take somebody one-on-one, then that's going to maximize his scoring potential. So for Andre Drummond to become an elite player, it sounds weird, but he's got to touch the ball less. And I think that's a very solid article. I read it last night, and it makes a lot of good points. Really hard to refute, because when you're using real facts, real numbers, it's hard to refute those points. And I think that for the Pistons, the less that Andre Drummond handles the ball, the better their offense will be. And I think that if they can adhere to that and make sure that they are spreading the ball around and making it difficult for the other team to defend one or two players, then it's going to make him, Andre Drummond, a better, more efficient offensive player. And you're not going to be able to just throw the ball into him and let him get hacked, because that's not the play that you're looking for. Andre Drummond should be pretty much your last option as far as getting a shot off. And his mid-range game isn't great, but I mean, if he can make the 10 to 15-foot shot, then you're going to be able to utilize him in some offensive sets that get the defenders away from him, get him some space, and if everything were to go according to the numbers that were published in that article, he's going to just, by design, become more efficient. And it was an interesting read, and it was a good read, just simply because when you think of making somebody elite, you think about getting them the ball more. But in this case, the less that Andre Drummond has the ball in his hands, the better he becomes. So it'll be interesting to see how the Pistons attack now with their new look, and with Andre Drummond still being there and still not being good at free throws, how they really try to maximize what they can by using the other players to give him that time and that limited time in that open space on the floor.
Yeah, and then you look at Boban Marjanovic's shot chart. He can, like I pointed out many times, he can score, he can rebound, he can draw and ones, he can hit free throws. Can Boban Marjanovic, of course, and Boban Marjanovic on his shot chart, most of his damage comes from under the basket, where he pins his defender under the rim and makes simple shots without really moving much. If Drummond can replicate this style in the post, he'd accumulate less touch time and be more efficient. So it's that simple.
The way the roster looks, I feel like Boban would be the player that you would bring off the bench if the outside guys aren't hitting as much, because he is much more talented at, as you said, utilizing the ball with it in his hands, driving, creating and one opportunities, or at least when he gets to the foul line, converting more chances. And if the outside guys aren't hitting, Andre Drummond is not the guy you want out there taking the ball in the post. Boban Marjanovic is that guy. And I think it gives him a nice 1-2 punch if used correctly. You know, maybe you're playing 82 games. At some point, somebody's going to go dry. And Boban, with his abilities that Andre Drummond doesn't seem to have, they could utilize him in that role where they're putting the ball into the post more if they're not hitting the outside shot, and at least getting more points per possession, simply because Boban's able to convert more of those chances, or as you mentioned, getting his defender inside the blocking circle and really making easy shots without having to exert a lot of effort and run around the lane and try to create space for himself, instead just kind of backing that guy down, getting an entry pass, and turning around and making an easy shot. So, by nature, if you're at the defensive end, you're going to try to front him, you're going to try to do other things. But Boban can get outside of the lane, get the ball in his hand, and take a couple of dribbles and still create a shot. Whereas Andre Drummond is not that type of player. So, again, if it's a perfect world, your outside guys aren't hitting. You bring Boban in, get the defense concentrated a little bit more towards him, try to get him less space, and that's going to naturally, again, give those guys more time and space to shoot from the outside, and it would make a nice complement. That's kind of where you were driving at this year to get Boban off the bench. Stan Van Gundy didn't feel the same way, and I think he mentioned that in his season-ending press conference that he really felt that he probably should have utilized Marjanovic a lot more than he did. And I think that the opportunity is there with Aron Baynes out of the equation. I think that he can make a lineup where Boban Marjanovic may not be the focal point of the offense by any stretch of the imagination, but he'll be able to complement what they're doing and give them a more effective presence in the painted area by being able to create some shots, or at least getting to the free throw line and converting more chances than Andre Drummond can.
Yeah, and that's very analytical work from Shameek Mohile, also a writer for Piston Powered and 16 Wins a Ring, editor for Roto Den, a noted pickup basketball marksman, constantly spewing hot takes. This is not hot takes we're looking at. This is 100% in-depth analysis, especially statistically and the way the game is being viewed. You can follow Shameek Mohile on Twitter at ShamShamGod, ShamShamm God, G-O-D, on Twitter. And follow 16 Wins a Ring on Twitter at 16 Wins a Ring. So, other Piston news here. Pistons signed power forward Eric Moreland from the Sacramento Kings to a multi-year deal. Probably either a bench player or a replacement for Marcus Morris. We'll have to see about that. They also re-signed small forward bench player Reggie Bullock to a 2-year, $5 million deal. So, that's Pistons. Now the only other team that we have left to cover is the Michigan State Spartans football team.
Touchdown, MSU!
Donnie Corley, Josh King, and Demetric Vance were all dismissed from the program amid the sexual assault allegations. They are still under investigation, awaiting their punishments in court. So, that's another one of our 5 questions. Just a little update on here. And speaking of 5 questions, it is that time for that segment. Buck, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
It's time for 5 questions on the Michigan Sports Truth.
Question number 1. Who and or what should the Tigers get in that huge return for Justin Verlander if they were to still trade him?
Well, there's kind of a question within that question, and it's going to be based on how much salary they're going to retain, because I think that's going to be the key. If they're not looking to retain salary, they're not going to get the return that they would probably desire. Looking at the Cubs farm system, rich in prospects. The one name that keeps popping up is Eloy Ramirez for the Cubs to possibly come back in a trade for Justin Verlander. I think that if you're the Tigers, who they should be looking for, they should be targeting players that the Cubs already have established players in that position that they're not going to be moving. And Eloy Ramirez fits that bill. And even though he's a dynamite prospect, the Cubs really, at this point, would have to make room for him by moving another piece that they may not be willing to move at this point. So I think if you're asking for what type of return Justin Verlander should get in return for his trade, Eloy Ramirez would probably have to be the centerpiece of that deal, simply because the Tigers dealing Justin Verlander, not only is it something that is going to reduce their payroll by some fraction, but it's also going to give them the opportunity to get Major League ready, or at least, if not Major League ready, guys that are going to be in the near future competing for a Major League roster spot. And Eloy Ramirez is by far the top player for the Cubs that the Tigers are targeting. So I think if you're going to make any trade for Justin Verlander, you're going to have to ask that Eloy Ramirez be included, simply because he's going to help you as an infielder, and he's also going to be helping you as a Major League ready or close to Major League ready prospect that the Tigers need to restock their farm system with.
Next question.
Question number 2. Can Andre Drummond find some way to improve offensively?
Well, we just talked about it. I mean, there is a way, and that's for him to touch the ball less and really become a conduit for the offense and become a complementary piece rather than a featured piece of that offense. And I think that Andre Drummond, if Stan Van Gundy can promise him more points and less free throws, that would be a bargain for both sides of that equation. So can he do it? Yes. The question is going to be, can he put aside his ego and whatever his feelings are about being a dominant post player or a dominant center in the NBA and really just get into what the analytics point him to, which is being a complementary piece? Then he could become an elite player simply by the law of averages and the numbers that have been provided. So the question really is, can he do it? Yes, he can. The question that I have is, will he? And that's going to be seen as they go through the preseason and Stan Van Gundy starts to modify the offense to fit the new pieces that they've acquired in the offseason.
And the question is, the other question inside the question is, can Drummond get over his poor free throw shooting, even if he improves it?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to improve a hell of a lot before they're even considering him a good free throw shooter. I mean, right now he's one of the most inept in the NBA. And, I mean, improvement is probably a relative term for him. Can he at least be somebody that is, I'm not asking him for him to go shoot 80%, but can he at least make it so that it's not a reward for him to go to the foul line? And by reward, I mean for the other team, the defensive team.
That's true.
Next question.
Question number 3. Where can Kentavious Caldwell-Pope go to next, one of the 7 destinations that I mentioned, after his qualifying offer contract year with the Pistons?
Well, and again, that's a tough question because you don't know how those rosters are going to look. But it's been said that Chicago has really been interested in him from the get-go, and other teams have kind of fallen off the wayside simply because of the other roster moves that they've made and the money that they've allocated to those roster moves. I think that for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, even though it would be difficult to let him go to a division rival for nothing, I think that Chicago would probably be his best fit. Chicago's made a lot of moves in the offseason. They've traded Jimmy Butler. They lost Taj Gibson. They lost some other complementary pieces. And I think for Chicago, what they're really missing in that lineup is a three-point threat that's able to play defense. And for Fred Hoiberg's troops, I think that he would probably be the best that they could add at this point on that roster. And for them to get him would probably be the best fit for him simply because he would be able to be a little bit more spotlighted in that offense and would probably be able to still get a good salary for what he's worth league-wide. So I think if you're going to look at any of those destinations that have been mentioned, Chicago would probably be his best landing point. Atlanta, I think, would be an outside shot simply because they could also use a player of his ilk. But I don't believe that he would go to Atlanta because I think Chicago would be able to pay him a little bit more and use him in the role that he's built for, which is that 3-point shooter / defender role.
Boil it down.
Next question.
Question number 4. How do the Red Wings move on without Tomas Tatar?
Well, I don't know if you really move on from losing your leading scorer. That said, they have guys that are probably ready to take roles on the NHL club. Evgeny Svechnikov is one. It's been rumored that he'll be playing with Dylan Larkin and Justin Abdelkader, at least in the preseason. And it will be interesting to see if he is able to win a spot on the full-time NHL roster. But as far as moving on without him, it's really going to hinge upon the free agent market after next season, because that's what he'll be included in. And I think that, again, goes back to Ken Holland or hopefully another GM that's at the helm next season, after next season, I should say.
Hopefully.
And if they're looking to move on and face the reality without Tomas Tatar on the roster, it's going to have to come from internal candidates. They're not going to have the money to spend on a big-name free agent forward that is able to produce at the level that Tomas Tatar is. What their hope is going to be is that players like Andreas Athanasiou, Evgeny Svechnikov, and to a lesser extent Dylan Larkin having a bounce-back year, those guys, and really just having more balanced scoring. Another person on that roster that's already there, you mentioned Mantha as well, Gustav Nyquist, who is kind of in that same vein of a slightly undersized forward that has value on the power play and, if in the right situation, can be a potent scorer. I think if they were to lose Tatar, they would really hope that Gustav Nyquist eating up some of that time would allow him to get more chances, more time with the puck, and also more time to hopefully get more points and earn his contract that he's currently under. So to move on is not going to be possible by just getting somebody else. It's going to have to come from within, and hopefully the improvement and maturity of the younger players coming up through the system would be able to make up for a portion of what Tatar is able to bring to the table.
Next question.
And finally, question number 5. What kind of punishments should Corley, King, and Vance receive in court later on? This is fun and stumping.
Well, it's going to really boil down to what evidence is there going to be presented at the trial. Because if they're able to, if the prosecution is able to provide a strong case that is backed with facts and with testimony from valid and believable witnesses, I'm not 100% familiar with what the punishments would be, but I would say that probably, they deserve what they get. So the prosecution that's going to be bringing that case against all three, if they're not able to get testimony and they're not able to bring forth witnesses that can corroborate what happened that night, then it's going to be a real uphill climb to convict them of the crimes that they've been charged with. That said, the court of public opinion is always different than a court of law. And I think that the case right now, as it stands in people's minds, and not people that are lawyers or anything else, they think they should get the maximum. But in those sexual assault cases, it comes down to what kind of testimony can they get from the witnesses that were there. And it's also going to be interesting to see that one of the other members, I can't remember his first name for the life of me right now, but Robertson, the other player that was dismissed, was a witness in that particular case. And it'll be interesting to see how the prosecution is able to present that now that Robertson has been charged, or has been accused, I should say, of a similar crime. And it's going to be very dicey But I think that what they deserve, what evidence is brought forth, and can the prosecution make the case that even though they're younger people, that what the crime that they've committed, if convicted, is befitting of the punishment that the the Michigan law allows. And it'll be very interesting to see if one domino falls where maybe one of them takes a plea deal in exchange for a lesser sentence to out one or two of the other defendants. And in those cases where it's 2 or 3 or more people that have been involved in an incident like that, typically the strategy is to get one person to kind of rat out or to sing like a bird, as the saying would go, and out the other two or the other people involved in the incident. And I think that depending on how that strategy goes will determine what those punishments will be.
Yeah, those are very good points. So that's our 5-question segment, and to our entire audience, if you want to answer those 5 questions, just replay that segment portion of this episode and answer them the best you can without going out of line. Now the other segment, what's your grade?
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
Got my red pen ready.
Yep. Whichever writing utensil you got, buddy. The Pistons trading Marcus Morris to the Celtics for Avery Bradley.
Well, it was a position that they needed to fill. Obviously, they weren't planning on re-signing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope after the other corresponding moves with Eric Moreland and Langston Galloway. Part of that is because they've been hard-capped underneath the luxury tax threshold, and so the writing was on the wall, and they needed to fill that spot with somebody other than Langston Galloway, for all his talent has been a backup to his bounce from team to team. So they did need somebody with a more consistent history, and they were able to get it. And the Celtics, who really needed to get rid of some assets or make some more room under that payroll to acquire Gordon Hayward, they kind of, I don't want to say they gave away Avery Bradley, but Marcus Morris is not the same player as Avery Bradley. I think it was a fair trade for both teams because Marcus Morris does bring something that the Celtics don't have right now. There's a strong front line, losing Kelly Olynyk to the Heat in free agency. So they're able to pick up Aron Baynes on free agent contract and also make a move for Marcus Morris. So it improves their front court, or their front line. And Avery Bradley coming to the Pistons really kind of fills the need, which is what they hope is what Kentavious Caldwell-Pope would be in 3 to 4 years, and they get him right now. He's an established player. He's 29, and at this point, everybody knows what he is. And I think that in Stan Van Gundy's system, where the emphasis is on long-distance shooting and defense, I think Avery Bradley fits that bill quite nicely. He does it at a reasonable price for the Pistons, and moving Marcus Morris was necessary simply because of the salary number that Marcus Morris was at. So I give that trade overall a B+. And the only reason I give it a B+ is because Marcus Morris was a vocal leader on that Pistons team, and that's something that they really were lacking, is more of a strong base of leadership. It'll be interesting to see what Avery Bradley brings to the table in that regard, but you are taking somebody that was an established veteran in the league and getting another one, but bringing him into a new locker room. There's always a challenge when you're bringing somebody into a new team, how well they assimilate with everybody else. So that is remainder to be seen, and I think that a B+ right now, it can turn into an A real quickly if Avery Bradley is able to work his way into the fabric of that team and become not only a vital part on the floor, but off the floor as well. So that's my grade for that trade.
B+ it is for now. How about MSU football's decision to dismiss Corley, King, and Vance? I'd give that an A+ because they're going to get their punishments in court for sure.
Yeah, I would say an A+ as well, and not simply because it's something that had to be done, but also for Mark D'Antonio, he's in a tough spot. He's coming off a real bad year, and those are 3 players, at least 2 of them, that were vital parts of that core that were hopefully going to be improving and becoming a part in a leadership role on that team, and instead they are no longer there. And I would give that punishment an A+ simply because it's real easy on the other side to say, well, we don't know really what happened. We can't really judge because the court has to go through its process. And Mark D'Antonio really did a nice job of navigating that, saying it's not going to be tolerated. And for him to make that decision with the climate of college football in the last 2 or 3 years with regards to sexual assault cases and player punishment, it really became a necessity for him to do that. And I applaud him for doing so in a quick and decisive manner. Once the investigation yielded the results it did, he really didn't have any choice, but I would say that he handled it with the best of his ability. And for that, I give him an A+, because he could have very easily gone the other way and said, well, we'll punish them internally, or we'll do something on our own terms, and then if the courts decide something different, we'll see what happens then. He didn't do that. He didn't pass the buck, so to speak, so that's why I give it an A+.
One more. This is going to be a really tough one. Tigers manager Brad Ausmus's decision to let Michael Fulmer pitch Sunday night in Cleveland before the All-Star break, thus not letting Michael Fulmer pitch at all in the All-Star game itself.
Well, we're not privy to the conversations that he has with players, and I'm sure that he did. I would hope at least that he talked to Michael Fulmer about it. And that said, a game against Cleveland, when your team is obviously going in the wrong direction, it would have been real easy for them to bring somebody up to pitch that night and say, hey, we're going to let Michael Fulmer pitch the All-Star game. The message that sends to the team at this time basically says we're giving up. So I think that even though Brad Ausmus is going to take a lot of heat for that, and I think that Michael Fulmer does deserve to pitch in the All-Star game because he is a very good pitcher, regardless of his team's record and his overall statistics when it comes to wins and losses. Michael Fulmer, obviously the future, part of the future for Tigers pitching. I'm going to give that one a B-. And the reason I do that is because, yes, it's a meaningless game in the whole grand scheme. If you win that game, great. You're only one game less above or below 500. But the message it would have sent to the Tigers team and all the other players to hold him out so he could pitch in an exhibition game, I think would have been the wrong move. But I also see the other side of it where, Brad Ausmus is trying to win games, and for him to say, yeah, I'm going to basically give this game up to Cleveland. I think if it was a team out of their division, he may have made that decision, but because it was Cleveland, I think that really weighed into the fact that he wanted Fulmer to pitch in that game. Had they been playing, we'll just say the Houston Astros, for example, they probably let Fulmer pitch in the All-Star game. And I think it was a little bit unfortunate they had Cleveland on the schedule, and Michael Fulmer got voted to the All-Star game, and he had to pitch on Sunday. So that's why I give it a B-, simply because of the optics that it would have given to the rest of that clubhouse had they said, you know what, Michael deserves this, we're going to basically give this game up, or we're going to put somebody in that spot that doesn't have a good chance to win that game as Michael Fulmer. I understand why people are upset, but you still have to go out there and you still have to win the game, or at least try to win the game, and that's why I give it a B-, because that is, at the end of the day, what Brad Ausmus's job is, and he's trying to do it the best he can, and he doesn't owe one player something over the good of the other 24.
Good points on that as well. So that's the What's Your Grade segment. And to the audience out there, post your grades for these three occurrences. Pistons trading Marcus Morris to the Celtics for Avery Bradley. MSU football's decision to dismiss Corley, King, and Vance. And Tigers manager Brad Ausmus's decision to let Michael Fulmer pitch Sunday night in Cleveland before the All-Star break. So, with that said, everything covered, that wraps up episode 272 on Spreaker. Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because I want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is in search of local advertising sponsors. If anyone has a business that's interested in sponsoring this program, you can follow Sports Radio Detroit on Twitter at Sports Radio Det, at Sports Radio DET, and send them a direct message or email them at Sports Radio Detroit in the contact section, or email owner Roger Castillo at rajcast81@gmail.com. Also like their Facebook page and join their Facebook group, and finally find their podcasts such as Out of Bounds Detroit Sports Radio, available on iTunes and Podbean. So, Buck, Geno, thanks again for your help. I will talk to you and Frank probably next week for episode 273.
Very good. Always glad to do it.
Absolutely. So, I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips, and follow Buck Geno at Buck Geno III, triple I in Roman numerals for Buck Geno III. And like the Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join its Facebook group. We'll talk to y'all next week on episode 273, The Week in Review. TTFN, ta-ta for now. Thanks very much for listening.
Bon appétit.